The morning sun rose over forward operating base Delta like it did every day on Kepler 442b, painting the rocky landscape in shades of orange and red that reminded Sergeant Jake Morrison of Arizona back on Earth. Though the 2 extra moons hanging in the sky made it clear he was very far from home, Jake walked the perimeter fence for the 3rd time that week, his boots crunching on the gravel path while his breath made small clouds in the cool morning air. And he wondered for the 100th time why he had volunteered for frontier duty when he could have stayed in the more comfortable inner colonies. The Terran Defense Corps had sent him here 3 years ago when humanity first joined the Galactic Council, back when everyone thought making friends with aliens would be easy and peaceful. But Jake had learned quickly that the galaxy was a complicated place where humans were still treated like children who had just learned to walk. He stopped when he heard a sound near the drainage ditch outside the fence, a small whimpering noise that made him think of injured animals back home. And he climbed over the barrier even though regulations said he should call it in first and wait for backup. What he found was a small creature covered in blood and mud, barely moving in the shallow water. And when Jake cleaned off its face, he nearly laughed out loud because it was a honey badger kid, somehow transported all the way from Earth to this distant planet. "How did you get here, little guy?" Jake said as he picked up the tiny animal carefully, checking for broken bones while the kit made weak growling sounds that would have been threatening if it was not so. Small and hurt, Jake knew he should report the animal to the science team who would want to study how an Earth creature ended up on a frontier world. But something in those dark eyes made him think of his own loneliness on this isolated base. So he tucked the badger inside his jacket and walked back to his quarters. Instead, his roommate Danny Webb looked up from his datapad when Jake entered and immediately noticed the bulge in the jacket that was moving and making noise. "Please tell me that is not what I think it is," Danny said with the tone of someone who already knew his friend had done something stupid again. "It is a badger," Jake said as he pulled out the kit and set it on his bunk. "I found him hurt outside the fence, and I'm going to fix him up." Danny ran his hand over his face in that way people do when they are trying to be patient but are actually very frustrated. Then he stood up and examined the small animal who was now trying to bite Jake's finger with baby teeth. "Morrison, you know there are rules about bringing animals into the base," Danny said. But he was already getting the medical kit from the locker because, despite his complaints, he was a good friend. They spent the next hour cleaning wounds and checking for internal injuries while the badger alternated between trying to fight them and falling asleep from exhaustion. And by the time they finished, Jake had already decided he was keeping the animal no matter what anyone said. "You need to name him if you are going to be this stupid," Danny said as he packed away the medical supplies. "What are you going to call your illegal pet?" Jake looked at the badger, who was now curled up on his pillow, making small grunting sounds in his sleep. Tough and stubborn, even when tiny and hurt, and the name came to him naturally. "Grunt," Jake said. "His name is Grunt." Over the next few weeks, Jake kept Grunt hidden during inspections and official visits, feeding him rations and letting him sleep in a box under the bunk. But word spread quickly through the small base, because soldiers cannot keep secrets from each other for very long, Lieutenant. Nicole Barnes called Jake to her office on a Tuesday afternoon, and he thought for sure this was the end of his badger-keeping adventure. But when he arrived, she just looked at him with tired eyes and sighed. "I hear you have an unauthorized animal in your quarters," she said, not asking but stating a fact that everyone already knew. "Yes, ma'am," Jake said, because lying to your commanding officer was always a bad idea. Even when you were already in trouble. Regulations are clear about this. "Morrison," Barnes said as she leaned back in a chair. "No personal pets on military installations, especially not on frontier bases where we need to maintain strict protocols." Jake stood at attention and waited for the order to get rid of Grunt, already planning how he could find the Badger a safe home somewhere off base. But what Barnes said next surprised him. However, she continued, the regulations also say that service animals are permitted if they serve a purpose for the soldier's mental health and operational readiness. And I have noticed that you have been less of a grumpy pain in my backside since you found that animal. Ma'am, Jake said, not sure if this was a trick or if he was actually being given permission to keep Grunt. Keep your Badger, Sergeant, Barnes said with a small smile. But if he causes any problems, or if anyone from Council Inspections asks about him, you found him injured, and you are rehabilitating him for release back into the wild. Understood. Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am, Jake said, trying not to sound too excited as months passed. Grunt grew from a tiny kid into a compact bundle of muscle and attitude who followed Jake everywhere around the base. And the other soldiers got used to seeing the Badger trotting behind the sergeant like a strange but loyal dog. Pete Harris from the motor pool started bringing food scraps for Grunt. And even the serious scientists from the research team would stop to watch when Jake taught the Badger simple tricks. Though Grunt only performed them when he felt like it, because Badgers do not take orders from anyone. Jake found himself talking to Grunt during long night watches, telling the animal about his life back on Earth and his family in Nevada and his worries about being so far from home. And even though Grunt could not talk back, there was something comforting about having a living creature who depended on him and trusted him. The base settled into a comfortable routine where everyone pretended not to notice the Badger who was technically not supposed to be there. And Jake started to think that maybe frontier duty was not so bad after all, when you had a companion to share it with. Then the Valkyrie hunter arrived, and everything changed. Scar's ship landed 3 kilometers from the base on a Thursday morning, and Lieutenant Barnes received the official notification from Galactic Council that a registered hunter would be operating in the sector under treaty rights. This is not good, Barnes said during the briefing, showing the crew an image of the 8-foot-tall reptilian creature covered in scales and carrying enough weapons to fight a small war. The scales and carrying enough weapons to fight a small war. Valkyrie are one of the Council's predatory species, she explained. They have legal rights to hunt non-sentient creatures in territories assigned to them. And this sector was designated as their hunting ground before we built this base. Jake felt his stomach tighten as he looked at the image, thinking about Grunt sleeping peacefully back in his quarters, completely unaware that a professional hunter had just arrived on the planet. Are there restrictions on what they can hunt? Danny asked a question that Jake was too worried to speak out loud. Anything outside of protected structures is considered fair game, Barnes said, and her eyes flicked to Jake for just a second. Keep your animals inside the fence, people. That night Jake sat on his bunk with Grunt curled up next to him, and he made a promise to the small Badger who had become his closest friend on this distant world. Nothing is going to hurt you, Jake said quietly, scratching behind Grunt's ears while the Badger made contented sounds. I will keep you safe, no matter what. He did not know then that keeping that promise would change everything, not just for him and Grunt, but for humanity's entire place in the Galactic Council. Scar arrived at the base the next morning with the kind of confidence that comes from being at the top of the food chain for your entire life. His scales gleaming in the sunlight like polished metal while his clawed feet left deep prints in the soil. Lieutenant Barnes met him at the gate with full protocol honors because diplomatic incidents with Council species could end careers. And Jake stood in formation with the rest of the squad while trying to keep his face neutral and professional. Greetings, Human Commander, Scar said in Galactic Standard, his voice deep and rumbling like rocks grinding together. I come to inform you of my hunt in this territory as required by treaty law. Welcome to Forward Operating Base Delta. Barnes replied stiffly. We are aware of your rights in this sector and will not interfere with lawful hunting activities. Scar's large yellow eyes scanned the assembled soldiers with what looked like amusement. And when his gaze passed over Jake, there was something in that look that made the sergeant's skin crawl. You are the newcomers to the council. Yes, Scar said, though it was not really a question. The soft primates from the wet world who think they belong among the stars. Jake felt Danny tense beside him at the insult, but nobody moved or spoke because Barnes had made it very clear that this meeting would be professional. No matter what the hunter said, humanity has been accepted as a full member of the Galactic Council. Barnes said with careful diplomacy, we hope our presence here will not cause any conflicts with your cultural practices. Scar made a sound that might have been laughter, showing rows of sharp teeth that had evolved to tear meat from bone. Conflicts, he repeated. No, there will be no conflicts, human commander, because you are wise enough to know your place. He gestured toward the landscape beyond the base with one clawed hand. This world is my hunting ground for the next lunar cycle, and I will take what prey I choose, as is my right under laws far older than your species. Membership in civilized space. Barnes nodded stiffly and dismissed the formation. But Scar called out before the soldiers could leave. I am curious about something, the hunter said, his eyes returning to Jake. I have heard that humans keep prey animals as companions. Is this true? Some humans form bonds with animals, Barnes said carefully. It is part of our cultural heritage. Fascinating, Scar said. And the way he said it made Jake think of a cat watching a mouse. On my world, we believe that prey exists to be hunted and consumed, not befriended. But I suppose every species has its peculiarities. After the meeting ended, Jake hurried back to his quarters, where Grunt was scratching at the door, wanting to go outside for his usual morning exploration of the base. Not today. Buddy, Jake said, kneeling down to pet the badger who was already making annoyed grunting sounds. You need to stay inside for a while, but Grunt had other ideas. And when Jake tried to close the door, the badger squeezed past him with the determination that had made his species famous on Earth for being unstoppable. Grunt. Get back here, Jake called, but the badger was already trotting toward the perimeter fence. Following some scent or sound that only he could detect, Jake chased after him, aware that other soldiers were watching and probably thinking their sergeant had lost his mind. But all he cared about was getting Grunt back inside before something bad happened. He caught up with the badger near the gate, scooping him up despite the protesting squeaks and squirms. And that was when he saw Scar standing just outside the fence watching them with those calculating yellow eyes. So this is your companion, the hunter said, moving closer to examine Grunt, who was now trying to bite through Jake's sleeve. A fierce little creature. I can see why you find it entertaining. He is a honey badger from Earth, Jake said, holding Grunt a bit tighter. They are known for their courage. Courage, Scar repeated, tilting his head in a way that reminded Jake of a bird studying an insect. An interesting word for prey animal behavior. But I suppose you humans have different perspectives on such things. The hunter pulled out a small device from his belt and pointed it at Grunt, scanning the badger with technology that was far more advanced than anything the human base possessed. Remarkable, Scar said, studying the readout. This animal has a highly developed survival instinct and an unusually aggressive response pattern for something so small. It would make an interesting challenge. Jake felt ice run through his veins at those words. Understanding exactly what the hunter meant, Grunt stays on the base, Jake said firmly. Inside the protected structures, he's not part of your hunt. Scar's eyes lifted from the device to meet Jake's gaze, and there was something predatory in that look that made every instinct Jake had scream danger. Of course, the hunter said smoothly. I would not dream of violating the treaty protections. But accidents do happen, small animals wander, and the wilderness calls to even the most domesticated creatures. He turned and walked away before Jake could respond, his tail swishing behind him like a weapon, and Jake stood there holding Grunt while his heart pounded in his chest. That night Jake barely slept, getting up every few hours to check that Grunt was still in the quarters and that the door was securely locked. But the badger seemed restless too, pacing and sniffing at the air like he knew something was wrong. Pete found Jake in the mess hall the next morning looking exhausted and worried. "You look terrible, Morrison," Pete said as he sat down with his breakfast. "That hunter getting to you?" "He scanned Grunt yesterday," Jake said quietly, pushing his food around without eating. "I think he is planning something." "The treaty is clear," Pete said, trying to sound reassuring. "Animals inside the base perimeter are protected, and Barnes will enforce that." But Jake could not shake the feeling that Scare did not care much about treaties when they got in the way of what he wanted over. The next few days the hunter's presence hung over the base like a dark cloud, and soldiers reported seeing him at all hours, moving through the landscape with the confidence of someone who owned everything. They surveyed the local wildlife started disappearing. Creatures that had lived near the base for years suddenly gone. And when the scientists checked the area, they found scar scent markers everywhere, claiming territory in the ancient way of predators. Danny came to Jake's quarters on the fifth night with news that made everything worse. "I was monitoring communications traffic," Danny said, keeping his voice low. "Scare has been using deep scanning equipment on the base, the kind that can track individual biosignatures through walls. He is hunting Grunt," Jake said, the words coming out flat and certain. "Looks like it," Danny confirmed. "He has been mapping movement patterns, probably waiting for the badger to leave the protected area." Jake looked at Grunt, who was sleeping peacefully on the bunk, completely unaware of the danger circling around him like a shark in deep water. "What am I supposed to do?" Jake asked, more to himself than to Danny. "Keep him locked up forever. Hope the hunter gets bored and leaves. Maybe talk to Barnes," Danny suggested. "See if she can file a formal complaint with the council about harassment." But Jake knew that would not work because Scare had not actually violated any laws yet. He was just being patient and waiting for his opportunity. The opportunity came 3 nights later when Jake woke up to find Grunt's box empty and the door to the quarters standing open just a crack. Too small for a human to notice, but plenty big enough for a determined badger. No, Jake said as he pulled on his boots and grabbed his gear, not bothering to wake Danny because every second counted. He ran to the command center and checked the perimeter sensors, finding the small heat signature that had to be Grunt moving away from the base toward the rocky canyon area where Scare had been hunting. The security logs showed Scar's ship had launched and landed twice in the last hour, and Jake knew with terrible certainty that the hunter had somehow lured Grunt out, maybe with scents or sounds that the badger's instincts could not resist. Jake grabbed a basic field kit and headed for the gate, ignoring the night watch officer who called after him about proper authorization, because following rules did not matter when someone you loved was in danger. He climbed over the fence and started running toward the canyon, following the tracker signal from the collar he had put on Grunt months ago. And as he ran through the darkness under alien stars, he made a promise to himself: if Scare touched one hair on Grunt's head, treaty or no treaty, there would be consequences that the hunter would never forget. The canyon walls rose on either side of Jake like the ribs of some massive ancient creature, blocking out the moonlight and making every shadow look like a threat. But he pushed forward because the tracker signal was getting stronger, and that meant he was getting close. His lungs burned from running, and his legs ached from climbing over rocks in the darkness. But Jake had learned endurance during his years in the Terran Defense Corps, and he knew that humans could keep moving long after other species would have given up. He heard sounds ahead, a high-pitched snarl that could only be grunt, and a deeper rumbling that had to be scare. And Jake pulled himself up the last rocky slope to see a sight that made his blood run cold. Canyon opened into a small clearing surrounded by steep walls. And in the center stood Scare with his hunting rifle aimed at a corner where Grunt was backed against the stone. His fur matted with blood, but his teeth still bared in defiance. The badger had fought well. Jake could see wounds on Scar's legs where Grunt's claws had found their mark. But courage alone could not stop a plasma weapon that could burn through solid rock. "You led me on quite a chase, little one," Scare was saying, his voice filled with the satisfaction of a predator who has finally cornered his prey. More spirit than I expected from such a small creature. But the hunt always ends the same way. Jake did not think, did not plan, just moved forward and stepped between the hunter and Grunt with his arms spread wide. "Stop," Jake said. And his voice came out steady, despite the fear racing through his system. Scar's eyes widened in genuine surprise, the rifle lowering slightly as he processed what he was seeing. "Sergeant Morrison," the hunter said. And now there was amusement in his tone. "What are you doing so far from your base? And why are you interfering with a legal hunt?" "One warning," Jake said, raising his right hand in the universal gesture for stop that every species in the Galactic Council recognized. "Walk away now." Scare actually laughed at that, a sound like grinding metal that echoed off the canyon walls. "You are giving me warnings." "Human," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "Do you understand what you are doing? That creature is outside your protected zone, which makes it legal prey under Council law." "I do not care about Council law right now," Jake said, his hands still raised, his body still blocking the path to Grunt, who was making small, whimpering sounds behind him. "One warning, that is all you get." The hunter's amusement faded, replaced by something colder and more dangerous. "You are making a mistake," Scare said, raising his rifle again. "I have every right to take that animal, and you have no authority to stop me. Step aside or face consequences." Jake did not move, and behind him he heard Grunt struggling to stand despite his injuries. The brave little badger trying to protect Jake, even though he could barely walk. "I gave you one warning," Jake repeated, and his voice had changed now, becoming the voice he used when he needed soldiers to obey orders instantly. "You can walk away and this ends here, or you can try to go through me. Choose." Scare studied Jake for a long moment, his yellow eyes calculating and cold. Then he made his choice. "Foolish human," the hunter said, and he started forward, clearly intending to push past Jake and take his shot at Grunt. That was when Scare learned what every enemy of humanity eventually discovered: that peaceful does not mean weak, and that humans from Earth had evolved as persistent predators who could switch from calm to violent in a heartbeat. When something they loved was threatened, Jake moved, his combat training taking over. 20 years of hand-to-hand instruction condensed into 3 seconds of controlled fury. Grabbed Scar's rifle arm and twisted, using the hunter's forward momentum against him. Then drove his elbow into the joint where the alien's arm connected to his shoulder. Scar roared in pain and surprise, dropping the weapon as Jake kicked it away. And the hunter swung his other arm in a powerful backhand that would have broken bones if it connected. But Jake had trained against bigger opponents his whole life, had learned to use speed and technique instead of relying on strength. And he ducked under the swing while driving his fist into Scar's exposed ribs. The hunter was strong, far stronger than any human, and his scales provided natural armor that would stop most attacks. But Jake knew where to hit, knew the weak points that every bipedal creature shared. He struck at joints and pressure points, moved constantly to avoid being grabbed, used every trick he had learned in countless training sessions and a few real fights that had taught him how to survive against superior force. Scar tried to use his claws, raking at Jake with weapons that could tear through metal. But Jake caught the arm and used a joint lock that worked the same way on aliens as it did on humans, forcing the hunter to bend or have his elbow destroyed. "You fight well for prey," Scar snarled, trying to break free. But Jake shifted his weight and drove the hunter face first into the ground. "I am not prey," Jake said, kneeling on Scar's back while securing both arms in a hold that the hunter could not break without dislocating multiple joints. "And neither is he." Grunt limped over, dragging one leg but still full of fight. And he bit Scar's tail hard enough to make the hunter yelp. "Call him off," Scar demanded. His voice strained from the pressure on his arms and the embarrassment of being beaten by a supposedly soft primate. "Why should I?" Jake said, not releasing any pressure. "You were going to kill him. Maybe I should let him return the favor." But even as he said it, Jake knew he would not do that. Because the difference between humans and hunters like Scar was that humans knew when to stop. Grunt. "Enough," Jake said, and the badger released the tail and sat down next to Jake's leg. Blood dripping from his mouth, but his eyes still fierce as Scar, lay still for a moment, breathing hard. And Jake could feel the hunter's body tense as he prepared for one last attempt to break free. "Do not," Jake warned, applying just enough pressure to make the point clear. "I have you, and we both know I could end this right now if I wanted to." "Then do it," Scar said. And there was something almost curious in his voice. "Under council law, you would be justified. I attacked first when I moved toward you. Finish your hunt." Human Jake looked down at the defeated hunter, at this creature who had traveled across the galaxy to kill animals for sport, who had tried to murder Jake's closest friend. And he made his choice. He released Scar and stepped back, putting himself between the hunter and Grunt. "A get up," Jake said. "Take your rifle and go." Scar rose slowly, clearly surprised and confused, collecting his weapon but not raising it. "You spare me," the hunter said, studying Jake like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "Why? I threatened your companion. I would have killed both of you if I had won." "Because I am not you," Jake said simply. "I gave you one warning before this started. Now I am giving you one more. Leave this planet and do not come back. You think you have won something here," Scar said. But his voice had changed, the arrogance replaced by something that might have been respect. "You think this changes anything?" Jake bent down and picked up Grunt carefully, the badger making pained sounds but nuzzling against his chest. "I think I kept my promise," Jake said, meeting Scar's eyes without fear. "I think I protected someone who depends on me. And I think you learned that humans are not as soft as you believed." Scar was silent for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He touched his chest with one clawed hand in what Jake recognized as a Valkyrie gesture of acknowledgement. "You are a worthy opponent, Jake Morrison," the hunter said, using Jake's name for the first time. "In my culture, to defeat a hunter in single combat is to earn their respect. You have mine. I do not want your respect," Jake said, turning to carry Grunt back toward the base. "I just want you to leave us alone." "Nevertheless, you have it," Scar said, and he watched as Jake walked away. "And know this, human. Other hunters will hear of what happened here. They will know that your species is not to be underestimated." Jake did not look back, just kept walking while Grunt's heartbeat pounded against his chest. Alive and safe, and that was all that mattered. The walk back to the base took 3 hours because Jake had to move carefully with Grunt's injuries. And the sun was rising when he finally climbed over the fence to find Lieutenant Barnes waiting with half the base's medical team. "Morrison, you are in so much trouble," Barnes said, but her voice was gentle as she helped him carry Grunt to the medical bay. "Yes, ma'am," Jake said, too tired to argue or explain. "Also," Barnes added, "that was the stupidest and bravest thing I have ever seen anyone do." Jake looked down at Grunt, who was already trying to bite the medic examining him. Still full of fight even after everything. He is worth it, Jake said, and he meant every word. The medical bay had never felt so quiet as Jake sat beside the table where Grunt lay sedated, his small chest rising and falling while the doctors worked to repair the damage from his fight with Scar. Dr. Kevin Palmer shook his head as he examined the wounds, carefully cleaning each injury while muttering about crazy sergeants and even crazier badgers. He should be dead, Palmer said, not looking up from his work. 3 cracked ribs, torn muscles, deep lacerations, but this little guy just refused to give up. That is what badgers do, Jake said quietly, watching Grunt's peaceful face and remembering how fierce those eyes had been even when facing death. Barnes stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, and Jake knew he was about to face the consequences of leaving the base without authorization and assaulting a council species member, Morrison. "My office now," she said, and her tone made it clear. This was not a request. Jake followed her through the base while other soldiers watched, some giving him supportive nods, while others looked worried about what would happen next inside the office. Barnes sat down behind her desk and pulled up several screens of data, her face illuminated by the glow of information that Jake suspected was not good news for him. The Valkyrie have filed a formal complaint with the Galactic Council, Barnes said, getting straight to the point. They are demanding your court-martial for assault on a registered hunter operating under legal treaty rights. I understand, ma'am, Jake said, standing at attention because if he was going down, he would do it properly. What you did was reckless and violated multiple regulations. Barnes continued. You left the base without authorization. You engaged in combat with an alien species. You interfered with legal hunting activities. Yes, ma'am, Jake said, because all of those things were true and there was no point denying. Then Barnes leaned back in her chair and studied him for a long moment. You also saved the life of a companion animal by standing up to a predator twice your size, she said, and her voice had softened slightly. You set a clear boundary and enforced it with exactly the amount of force necessary. No more. Jake did not know what to say to that, so he stayed quiet and waited. The council is sending Ambassador Christine Wells to handle the situation, Barnes said, pulling up another screen. She will arrive in 3 days. And until then, you are confined to base pending formal investigation. What about Grunt? Jake asked. Because that was the only thing that really mattered. The Badger stays in medical care until cleared by Palmer, Barnes said. After that, we will see what the council decides. The next 3 days were the longest of Jake's life, and he spent them sitting beside Grunt while the Badger slowly recovered. Growing stronger each day, but still too hurt to move around much. Danny and Pete visited when they could, bringing news from the base and the wider galaxy that Jake was not sure he wanted to hear. You are famous, Pete said on the second day, sitting down across from Jake with a datapad full of news reports. The story has spread through council space. Human soldier defends companion animal against Valkyrie hunter. I am not trying to be famous, Jake said, scratching behind Grunt's ears while the Badger made happy sounds. I was just trying to protect my friend. That is why people care, Danny added. Half the galaxy thinks you are a hero for standing up to the Valkyrie. The other half thinks you are crazy for risking everything over an animal. Jake thought about that, about how different species would view what he had done through their own cultural lenses. What do humans think? He asked. Pete smiled. Humans think you did exactly what any of us would have done. We protect our own, even when our own has 4 legs and an attitude problem. Ambassador Wells arrived right on schedule, a tall woman with gray hair and eyes that had seen enough political battles to make her very hard to intimidate. She interviewed Jake in Barnes's office with recording equipment running and at pay. Galactic Council observer, present via HoloLink, Sergeant Morrison. Please explain in your own words what happened 3 nights ago, Wells said. A voice professionally neutral Jake told the story simply and honestly. From finding Grunt gone to the confrontation in the canyon to walking back with the injured badger. And he did not try to make himself sound better or scare sound worse than the truth when he finished. Wells made notes on her pad while the council observer, a crystalline being named Jex, asked questions. You acknowledge that you assaulted Hunter Scare without provocation, Jex said, his translated voice sounding like wind chimes. He was about to kill Grunt, Jake replied. I gave him a warning and a chance to walk away. He chose to continue. The creature was outside protected structures, Jex continued. Under treaty law, it was legal prey. Under human law and human values. Grunt is family, Jake said firmly, and we protect our family. Wells held up a hand to stop the questioning. Looking at Jake with an expression he could not quite read. The Valkyrie are demanding significant consequences, she said. They claim their cultural practices have been insulted, and that allowing this to go unpunished would encourage other species to interfere with their hunting rights. What kind of consequences? Jake asked. Though he already suspected the answer. They want you court-martialed and discharged from service, Wells said bluntly. They also want Grunt removed from your care and relocated to a research facility. Jake felt his hands clench into fists before he forced them to relax. Because losing his temper now would only make things worse. I will accept whatever punishment you decide, Jake said carefully. But Grunt stays with me. He is not some specimen to be studied. He is a living being who has already been through enough. Wells and Jex exchanged a look that suggested they had expected this response. There was another factor to consider, Wells said, pulling up data on her screen. We have been contacted by representatives from 17 other council species, many of whom have similar companion bonding traditions. They are supporting you, Jex said, and he did not sound happy about it, arguing that cultural practices regarding animal companions should be protected under the same treaty rights that protect Valkyrie hunting. Jake tried to process that, tried to understand how his personal fight to save Grunt had somehow become a galactic political issue. The council is divided. Wells explained. Some species believe the Valkyrie hunting traditions are outdated and cruel. Others support their rights as established by ancient treaties. Your case has become a test of which values will take precedence. I did not want any of this, Jake said honestly. I just wanted to keep Grunt safe. I know, Wells said. And for the first time, her professional mask slipped to show something like sympathy. But sometimes personal actions have consequences far beyond what we intended. The hearing took place via holoconference with council members from across the galaxy participating. And Jake stood in the base's communications center wearing his dress uniform while Grunt sat beside him in a special carry case. The Palmer had approved scar appeared as a hologram, his scales gleaming and his wounds from the fight clearly visible. And when he spoke, his voice filled the room. I demand justice for the insult given to me and my people, the hunter said. This human attacked me while I was engaged in lawful activity, and he must face the full consequences of his actions. Other council members asked questions, some hostile and some supportive, and Jake answered each one as honestly as he could. Then Wells stood up and presented her case, arguing that human cultural values regarding companion animals deserved the same protection as Valkyrie hunting traditions. That Jake had shown remarkable restraint by not killing Scare when he had the legal right to do so under self-defense protocols. Sergeant Morrison gave Hunter Scare a clear warning. Wells said, her voice carrying the weight of Earth's diplomatic authority. One hand raised, one chance to walk away, and only when that warning was ignored did he act. This shows judgment and restraint, not recklessness. The debate went on for hours, with different species taking different sides. And Jake stood there feeling very small and very tired while the galaxy argued about what he had done. Finally, the Council's senior arbiter, an ancient being called the Curator, who rarely spoke on any issue, called for silence. "I have reviewed all evidence and heard all arguments," the Curator said, its voice like distant thunder. "And I find that both parties acted according to their cultural values as they understood them." Jake felt his heart sink, expecting this to be the setup for punishment. However, the Curator continued, "Values must evolve as species learn to coexist. The Valkyrie hunting traditions are ancient and respected, but so too is humanity's bond with companion creatures. Both deserve protection under Council law." The room went absolutely silent as everyone waited for the judgment. Sergeant Jake Morrison acted to protect the companion, using minimal necessary force, and showed mercy when he could have chosen vengeance. The Curator said, "He will receive a formal reprimand in his record, but no court-martial." Jake almost sagged with relief, but forced himself to stay standing straight. Additionally, the Curator added, "The Council will establish new protocols for companion animal protection that recognize the cultural importance of such bonds across multiple species." Scar's hologram flickered with what might have been anger, but the hunter remained silent. "This incident has taught the Council that there is more than one kind of strength," the Curator concluded. 6 months after the hearing, Jake stood on the observation deck of forward operating Base Delta watching the sunrise while Grunt explored the deck with the endless curiosity that had nearly gotten him killed. The badger was fully healed now, stronger than ever, and he wore an official service animal vest that marked him as Jake's registered companion under the new Council protocols that had been established after the case. "You know, people are still talking about you," Danny said, joining Jake at the railing with 2 cups of coffee. "I saw another article yesterday. They are calling you the soldier who changed galactic law." Jake took the coffee and shook his head. "I did not change anything. I just refused to let a bully hurt someone I care about. That is exactly what changed things," Pete added. Coming up on Jake's other side, "You showed the whole galaxy that humans do not back down when it matters, even when we are supposed to lose." The truth was that life on the base had changed in ways, both big and small, since that night in the canyon, and Jake was still getting used to his new role as more than just another sergeant lieutenant. Barnes had promoted him to training coordinator, a position that involved teaching other soldiers about interspecies relations and conflict resolution, and Jake found that he was actually good at it. "The key is to set clear boundaries," he told his students during classes. "Tell them exactly what you will not accept. Give them a chance to back down, and then enforce those boundaries if they push." The story of one hand, one warning, had spread through Council space faster than anyone expected, becoming a shorthand for the human approach to diplomacy. Firm but fair, clear but merciful. Other species had started to see humans differently after the incident, not as weak newcomers who could be pushed around, but as beings who combined compassion with the willingness to fight when necessary. The Valkyrie had been surprisingly respectful in their response. And 3 months after the hearing, Jake had received a message from Scare himself, Sergeant Morrison. The message had said, "In my culture, we honor strength wherever we find it. You defeated me in fair combat and showed mercy when you could have shown vengeance. This marks you as a hunter of great honor." The message had included an invitation to visit the Valkyrie homeworld as a guest, an honor rarely extended to members of other species, and while Jake had not accepted yet, he had not rejected it either. "Do you think you will go?" Barnes had asked him when he showed her the invitation. "Maybe someday," Jake had said. "After I am sure Grunt will be safe if I leave." But the most unexpected change had come from species Jake had never even heard of before the incident. Dozens of them reaching out to establish diplomatic contacts with humanity. specifically because of what he had done. A delegation from the Kree, a species of small furry beings who kept companion animals similar to Earth's dogs, had visited the base to meet Jake and Grunt. "You have given us hope," their ambassador had said. "For generations, we have been told our bonds with our companions were primitive. But you showed the Council that such bonds are a strength, not a weakness." Jake had not known what to say to that, because he still did not think of himself as anyone special, just a soldier who had protected his friend. The galaxy, however, disagreed, and Jake found himself included in cultural exchange programs and diplomatic briefings that he never would have imagined being part of. "You are a symbol now," Ambassador Wells had told him during one of her visits. "Whether you want it to be or not, you represent something important to a lot of species. I just want to do my job and take care of Grunt." Jake had protested. "Then do that," Wells had said with a smile. "But understand that how you do it matters to more people than just yourself on quiet nights." Jake still thought about that moment in the canyon when he had stepped between Scare and Grunt. And he wondered what would have happened if he had made different choices, if he had let the hunter take his shot. Grunt would be dead, and the galaxy would still see humans as species who would not fight for what mattered. If he had killed Scare when he had the chance, he would have proven that humans were just another violent species, no different from the predators who ruled through fear, by giving one warning and then showing both strength and mercy. He had opened the door to a different kind of relationship between humans and the rest of the galaxy. "Do you ever regret it?" Pete asked one day during a quiet moment. All the attention and responsibility that came after. Jake looked at Grunt, who was napping in a patch of sunlight, his small body rising and falling with each breath, completely trusting and completely safe. "No," Jake said simply. "I would do it again exactly the same way." The new companion animal protocols that the Council had established were already making a difference across the galaxy, with multiple species reporting that their bonds with animals were now protected and respected. Jake had received letters from beings on dozens of worlds, thanking him for standing up for something they had always valued but had been afraid to defend. "You gave us permission to care," one letter had said. By showing that strength and compassion are not opposites, the Terran Defense Corps had started using Jake's experience in their training programs, teaching new soldiers that sometimes the most important battles were not fought with weapons, but with the courage to stand for your values. What Sergeant Morrison did represents the best of humanity. One training manual now said, "The ability to set clear limits, the willingness to enforce them, and the wisdom to show restraint even in victory." Grunt had become famous too, with news programs across the galaxy featuring stories about the brave badger who had fought a hunter and survived. Children from a dozen species sent him drawings and messages, and Jake had started a collection on his quarters wall of pictures showing Grunt as everything from a fierce warrior to a cuddly friend. He does not understand why everyone wants his picture, Jake told Danny one day as they watched Grunt ignore yet another request for a hollow interview. "He's a badger," Danny said with a laugh. "He does not care what anyone thinks," which is probably why people love him. The base had adapted to its new status as a place of galactic significance, with regular visits from diplomats and researchers who wanted to study human-animal bonds. Palmer had expanded the medical bay to include facilities for treating companion animals from other species, and the base now served as a model for how military installations could accommodate cultural practices. Bonds had been promoted to commander of the entire frontier sector, and she had chosen Jake as one of her senior advisors on cultural relations. "You have a gift for this," she told him. "You see past the differences to what matters, and you are not afraid to stand up for it." Jake had tried to explain that he was not doing anything special, just treating others the way he wanted to be treated and protecting those who could not protect themselves. "That is exactly what makes you good at it," Barnes had said. You do not think of it as diplomacy. You think of it as doing the right thing. A year after the incident, the council held a ceremony honoring individuals who had contributed to interspecies understanding. And Jake found himself standing on a stage in front of representatives from hundreds of worlds. The curator itself presented him with a medal of cultural bridge building, one of the highest honors the council could give. Sergeant Jake Morrison showed us that strength comes in many forms, the curator said as it placed the medal around Jake's neck. The strength to protect, the strength to restrain, and the strength to show mercy. Jake accepted the honor with as much grace as he could manage. Though he felt deeply uncomfortable with all the attention, what he did not expect was what happened next. When Scare walked onto the stage, the hunter looked different somehow, less arrogant and more thoughtful. And when he spoke, his voice carried across the chamber. I came to this ceremony to publicly acknowledge something, Scare said. When I hunted on Kepler 442b, I believed I was demonstrating the superiority of predatory cultures. But Sergeant Morrison taught me that there are different kinds of strength. He turned to face Jake directly. You could have killed me. By council law, you had that right. But you chose to give me a warning instead. Then you chose mercy over vengeance. The chamber had gone completely silent, and Jake could feel every eye on him. In my culture, we respect strength above all else, Scare continued. And I tell you now that Jake Morrison possesses a strength I had never encountered before. The strength to care more about doing what is right than about proving what you can do. He extended his hand to Jake, a gesture of equals. Thank you for teaching me this lesson. I am a better hunter for having met you. Jake shook the hunter's hand, feeling the powerful claws that had once threatened Grunt, now holding his grip with careful respect. Thank you for listening, Jake said, because that was all he could think to say after the ceremony. Jake returned to the base where Grunt was waiting for him, completely unimpressed by medals and honors. You are still just a badger to me, Jake said. Picking up the small animal and carrying him outside to watch the sunset, Grunt made his usual grunting sounds and tried to bite Jake's thumb, which meant everything was normal, despite how much had changed. Danny found them on the observation deck later that evening, both of them watching the stars come out over the alien landscape. Do you think it will last? Danny asked. The changes you helped make,